It's massively satisfying to know that there is now or will not be a barrier to low cost, high performance for anybody in New Zealand. That's been our goal and our drive, and it's there. We can almost touch it.
ProClimber inspires and educates people to create healthy, durable and energy efficient buildings to live, learn, work and play in. Welcome to the ProClimber podcast. In this week's episode, we're joined by Kim Aitkin, an engineer who hails from Ireland and is the driving force behind Truss House. Kim shares her journey from traditional engineering into developing a completely new way of building, the Truss House system, and how that innovation was catapulted into the spotlight after a successful appearance on Dragon's Den. Well, welcome, Kim. It's a real pleasure to have you on the ProClimber podcast today. And even though you've had a late flight, I really appreciate your effort. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to catching up, having a conversation. It's been a wee while.
It's been fantastic watching your journey, Kim. I mean, I met you probably, 4 years ago maybe now?
Yeah.
Kim, going back a little bit, you were kind enough to share with me that you were born and raised in Ireland and then moved on to Scotland to study. Tell us about what was it like growing up in Ireland?
Yeah, good question. It always confuses people, my rather interesting accent. Probably the most different aspect of life in Ireland in the 80s that people maybe do or don't understand is it was quite a divisive community. There was quite a lot going on in a political sense between the two sides, Catholics and Protestants. And I was one of the children who marginally at the time seems really strange to make such a deal about it, but my mother was Irish Catholic and my father was Scottish, Church of Scotland, also known as a Protestant. So I was in the south of Ireland, but because of my parents, we were very much excluded from Catholic society. It was quite an interesting time to be a child. So we ended up at the one school in the town that allowed Protestants as a Catholic child. So I do tell this story a little bit. People are quite interested in what it was like. So it was quite a hard place to be. I would say school was tricky. There were 6 Catholics in my class out of 30 kids. The people in school didn't love us. And then the people outside of school, because we wore the Protestant uniform, also didn't love us. So Ireland, in particular Cork, where I grew up, never fully felt like home. It never felt like a place that I wanted to stay and raise children, to be honest. So partly drove my 18 years, finished school, and really had loved the time we'd spent in Scotland with my father's family, and really felt more like Scotland was the place I wanted to study and spend time and be around cousins and enjoy that side of life. And I would say today, Scotland still feels like my spiritual home. So yeah, it was an interesting period of my life.
Scotland is a beautiful place. I spent about a year in the UK doing an OE back in 95, and I remember working in a beautiful old stone hotel in a place called Tarbet of Scotland. So yeah. So you went to Scotland to study. What excited you about choosing product design engineering as a field, Kim?
I kind of had a really difficult time deciding what to do. I really love reading English, kind of like math and science. I was quite into design, physical and kind of creative design. And I actually remember the day, I guess I was about 17, sitting in the school library on an early version of the internet. And I found this course. I was looking at the University of Glasgow. My grandfather was alumni there and family in Glasgow. And this product design engineering popped up, very small course. And it was a joint degree between the University of Glasgow and the Glasgow School of Art, which was quite a well-known kind of creative centre. And I can remember the feeling like my heart was racing and my stomach started to flip. I knew I'd just found this little niche that really captured my everything. It was all I could think I wanted to do, to the point that I didn't apply for anything else. I just only applied for that one course. I was definitely the merging of the two disciplines and the ability or the opportunity to go to Scotland to study. It wasn't common University in Ireland at the time was free. So a lot of my friends were leaving home, and we had quite a good university in our city. So majority of people were leaving school, living at home, going to university. It was free. You could do medicine, you could do law, anything you wanted. And I chose the move to a different country, pay fees, pay for accommodation. It was quite a big leap to take. But I was just so sure this was the course that I really wanted to do.
Great that you had that so early, you were able to make that decision. So once you finished your studies, how did getting into the real world and actually working, where did you start off with in your career?
Probably the most interesting part of my life while I was at university was I joined the University Officer Training Corps. So it was an adjunct of the British Army attached to the university, where students studying could kind of fast track in to be officers in the British Army. So for 4 years, that was what I did on my weekends and my summers and, the evenings off, which was a little bit left field, but really gave me some solid direction, I thought at the time. So I had decided kind of midway through my studies that I would be a full-time British Army officer. And right around that time, the Afghanistan-Iraq war had erupted, and a number of people that I'd known kind of who were years ahead of me in the training corps had gone overseas, and a few of them had come back. Meeting people who'd gone and come back, I realized that actually this wasn't what my future was going to be. It kind of gave me a real reality check to what were the effects of being involved in conflict at that level. I was planning on entering the engineering corps, being a Royal Engineering officer, so maybe not as much frontline. But I suddenly found myself a bit rudderless. By the time I graduated, I think probably solidly for about 6 months, I would sit with my application written to join the British Army and go to Sandhurst, and I just couldn't press apply. I just could not bring myself, knowing I didn't really believe that this was the right path to go. So post-graduation was a little bit tumultuous. I graduated in 2006. So I did go back to Ireland. I had had a summer job in my last year at the city council. They had a graduate engineering program, paid really well, and kind of offered a 2-year period of stability. So I ended up picking up that as an option whilst I wrestled with, should I not go and follow this alternate path. So it was not a seamless transition into the workforce, for sure. And by the time that graduate engineering program, 2008, finished, it was just the start of the global financial crisis. Ireland in particular was hit really, really hard. So the seemingly right option at that point was to take off and go overseas. So that's how I ended up initially doing a kind of a recce into Canada, and ended up kind of sussing it all out and coming back to Ireland with an idea that there was definitely a lot of opportunities in Canada at the time, and ended up relocating back to Canada in 2011. At that time, I had got married and decided to start my family in that gnarly gap where there didn't appear to be any work, and ended up moving overseas with a 9-month-old to start work in Canada. So very tumultuous time, I think, looking back in my life.
Where did you come with this idea for the Truss House?
The interesting piece about where we ended up living in Canada, so we were in a kind of more rural part, northern part of the province of Ontario. You could drive for 24 hours north and still be in Ontario. The vast scale of Canada still blows one's mind. The community we were living in was cottage country. So lots of beautiful lakefront $1 million houses, and then lots of winter unemployment and local people struggling to get on the property ladder. So I was fortunate to land a job with a local structural engineering firm, and I actually retrained at that point to be a structural engineer. There were no product design engineering jobs anywhere in the vicinity. Structural design was pretty close for me. It solved complex problems around structure versus product. The journey started with structural design engineering, and when you're designing in a climate that is so harsh, in particular 6-month winters, minus 40, minus 50, flipping into summers where it was plus 30, plus 40, then that moisture ingress cycle between the freeze-thaw cycle And then this warm, damp air really accelerated building deterioration. So even though I had trained as a structural engineer and my primary role was structural engineering, we were acutely aware of ensuring moisture didn't get into the wrong place in the building. So ergo ended up on kind of learning the building science. How do we keep the moisture out to prevent this building blowing apart when it freezes? So I just really kind of enjoyed the intersection of building science and structure. And after probably 6 to 8 years of working on people's elaborate lakeside cottages, I got really more interested in how are the lives of the people who build these cottages, the builders, how are they doing? A lot of builders were unemployed in the winter. It just all felt a little bit wrong. And I became more and more interested in how do we find a way for these builders, A, to have employment in the winter, and B, to build homes that were financially viable given where we were. And friends of mine were paying $800 a month in electricity in the winter. Like their home ownership journey was an old house they could afford, could get a mortgage on, but then the cost of living in that house was extensive. So I really just felt like that was a problem that had yet to be really figured out. So the genesis and the pain point in my own experience as well was, how do you find a way to build affordable housing in remote locations or locations where there's very limited opportunities, and do so at a time of year that you can get access to the trades, thereby giving stability, I guess, to the region in its entirety. Quite a unique place to be.
I was quite amazed when I first met you and heard about this, but you actually approached the TV program Dragon's Den, didn't you? Tell us about that. That sounds fascinating.
The kind of learning curve of starting a business in the construction sector, I just started building. I had some wonderful people who believed in the idea and what I was doing. I was at that point, a single parent of 2 kids, earning money as an engineer, and I quit that job because there were people who believed in the concept and the idea and the future. And we just started to build for other people. And within 6 months of starting, we had so much demand and no access to capital. So we could see that we were a new business. You can't talk to banks about, cash flow, overdraft, anything without 2 years of financials. And I kind of hit on, we actually need to scale this beyond the region. The global opportunity, the international opportunity, the nationwide opportunity for Canada. And the only option, to be honest, at that point was to find private investment. And Dragon's Den kind of seemed to be a way to get access to knowledge, capital, but also the kind of global scale opportunity. It's very difficult in a small community to talk about the global opportunity. It's not a place that, people are really excited about. So we were ready to solve all the world's problem in housing, and the platform of Dragon's Den was definitely a way to get in front of that world, really. So 6 months in, applied, got invited to do a pitch, like a pre-pitch, went to do the pre-pitch, and then got invited to do the show in Toronto. So it was a moment of madness, I think, at the time. And then decided to build a small truss house, not called Truss House at the time, on set. So you have a dedicated, I guess, producer who works with you after you've been invited to kind of, what's your plan? What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? And, we came up with this harebrained idea of manufacturing a slice of the house, transporting it to Toronto and bringing it into the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Company building. And then the builders were going to build it backstage. And then we were going to move it onto set to be able to pitch to the Dragons. So that in itself was quite an epic process.
I'm sure. And what was the outcome? Did you end up getting money?
Well, I ended up getting a deal. So this was 2019 when this was all happening. So we went and recorded or pitched June 2019, and it's a 10 or 12 minute episode on Dragon's Den. We were in there for an hour and 20 minutes, is way beyond the usual time frame. And how it all went down, you practice, you rehearse, you practice, you rehearse. And they had this whole dramatic entry. We were going to go up some stairs and come along a walkway and come down some stairs and then walk through the house, the slice of house, and then start pitching the presentation. So I kind of forever remember the moment of standing at the top of the stairs, and I lost all the moisture in my in my mouth. Like I was like, oh my God, I actually don't think I can speak. I was shaking. It was such a surreal hit me in the moment. We'd been so busy getting this thing built backstage that we ended up kind of suddenly getting hit by reality. So I would say, as pitches go, it all went terribly wrong after the first moment, after we did our intro. And that was primarily because one of the dragons was a builder developer and he knew straight away what he was looking at. So he got so excited, launched into questions. The rest of the dragons were looking at each other going, what are we even talking about? We don't even get this, let alone guy was up out of his chair. And, so it kind of started the way we didn't want it to start, but I think they could see that their colleague was super into it and understood the kind of moment, the wow moment. So after an hour and 20 minutes, we got an offer from two of the dragons. So this Vincenzo, who was a developer, and then Michelle Romano, kind of who we were hoping to work with, young female engineer turned investor. And we kind of walked out of there with the offer, with the dream, with these guys are going to come on board and help us bring this across Canada and then into the world. So that was all fantastic. And then in the way of the world, they aired the episode in November. And then we kind of didn't get much information from the dragons in the gap between when they recorded and when they aired the episode. And I guess my understanding is the dragons themselves don't have a hand in the production. So with all the hour and 20 minutes of all the times where they were frustrated and they didn't understand and we were kind of fighting our corner and trying to explain, it just was messy. The dragons themselves weren't sure which part was going to end up being aired. Was it going to be the happy, good luck, great story, or was it going to be the how it all goes terribly wrong? So we didn't hear much from them until after the episode got aired in November and they'd taken the positive thread. So we had meetings set up in January 2020 to go to Ottawa and meet with Vincenzo and his team to kind of discuss the deal, the product, the terms, how we were going to move forward. So a few things had changed in that intervening 6 months. And then after that, thereafter.
That's quite a story, Kim. In the midst of all this, you decide to move to New Zealand.
In the midst of all this part of our, how do we take this to the world, the Canadian government had a program where they had recently, I believe, signed a trade agreement. It was a Trans-Pacific trade agreement with Australia, New Zealand. I think Mexico was involved. The US was not involved. So they were looking for companies who were looking to kind of export to those trade agreement countries. And in particular, housing was one that was on the list of what are other countries struggling with that Canada could offer. So we ended up on a government program, and I had come to New Zealand in July 2019, back to New Zealand in August 2019, and then November 2019 as well. There was a kind of a 4-step process under this program, and that was to come both to Australia and New Zealand. So we were 3 times in New Zealand and twice in Australia in 2019. And the way the business model was set up was that we built only in the winter. Truss House, Aitkin frame, only built in the winter, and the summer was product development because the builders were busy building cottages. So our model was, working really well. And what actually happened in January 2020, when I was supposed to go to Ottawa, is I kind of found out my father, who was still living in Ireland, had cancer. So I moved to the meeting. I reached out and said, I cannot come to Ottawa. I need to go to Ireland. I've just found out my father's, unwell. The meeting was rescheduled for April 2020. In Ottawa. So I ended up going to Ireland and, coming back to Canada early February. In that time, we had one final step in our export program. That was the magic step for us because we had to fund the entire phase, and then the government would reimburse us the money that we had put out to kind of create these relationships at the time with the New Zealand government Kiwi Build and then with the Canadian Trade Commissioners in Sydney to really look at how Truss House could be an opportunity for both countries to solve some housing crisis issues. And the confluence of timing put us on a plane coming back to New Zealand on March 12th, 2020 for a couple of weeks. The plan was to be here for 3 weeks, 4 weeks. We had a trade event that we were launching Truss House into the New Zealand market with a partner, and it was all really meant to be a short visit, not a permanent relocation. So Best laid plans. So because of this famed Irish passport, I was unable to go back to Canada. I didn't have high enough status. I was just become eligible to apply for permanent residency in November 2019. I didn't have high enough status to be allowed back into Canada during COVID. And simultaneously, New Zealand was operational. Canada shut down. There was no lockdowns, there were no COVID. We were able to continue to build our business here whilst everything in Canada had kind of stopped. So in some ways, it was an easy decision to remain here in that early phase of 2020.
And this design that you'd come up with, this truss house, obviously you're going from a minus 40 to almost a plus 40. And now you land here in New Zealand, and obviously we've got a very mild climate. We're sort of between maybe 5 and at the max 30 up here in the North Island. And how did this design that you designed for this harsh climate fit into the New Zealand climate?
The critical piece that we did when we were doing this Canadian kind of export program, both in a kind of analysis report to then be kind of qualified to get the funding to do this international trip, is that Truss House worked really well where there were climatic conditions that introduced complexity. So from a New Zealand standpoint, the issue wasn't so much energy, building performance and insulation. It was things like seismic and wind and the complexity and cost that those environmental factors added to building. So the two problems that New Zealand were trying to solve in particular in 2019 was the advent of offsite manufacturing. So there was a real interest and an appetite in New Zealand for rapid build housing, particularly with government. And our unique value proposition for the New Zealand market was more around being able to build across the country the same house without really being impacted by the complex structural requirements of seismic and wind loading. And that was coupled with the government's attempt to procure offsite manufacturing supply chain in New Zealand. So the government had just done a round of RFPs or RFIs, requests for information, around scale delivery of housing. And there were not any suppliers in New Zealand with factories big enough to deliver the scale that the New Zealand government was interested in. So our value proposition was not, we can design this for you offshore and transport modules to New Zealand. Our design proposition was, you can go to any of these existing 80 frame and truss manufacturers that are in every community and serve every community in New Zealand. And with zero capital investment, you can enable these frame and truss to become that local manufacturing facility that can do tens, hundreds, up to thousands of housing systems a year that will be easily and readily compliant with complex seismic and wind without introducing any financial penalty. And the added benefit was the wide wall system allowed quick and inexpensive way to add the volume of insulation that people would like to have in order to have a low energy home. So it was quite a unique value proposition. And in Australia, again, it was different because their size and scale of the country was an issue. Remote manufacturing and building was an issue, but also rapid rebuild after fires. So we kind of had almost like a different recipe for every country. And that is still the case today, depending on what the issues were. So it was not a hard sell so much in New Zealand because we were not selling on efficiency. We were selling on speed, kind of lack of complexity in the building structure itself.
Obviously, we're talking in an audio-only format here. Can you try and give a visual description to someone that's been hearing this word Truss House so that they can understand how this actually works?
Just talk about New Zealand for now. Premise in New Zealand is that 97% of houses use a roof truss. And the beauty and benefit of using a roof truss on any build is it's a bunch of wood and some steel plates, and it's triangulated very much like a bridge. And it sits on the top of the house and it deals with all the roof loads, wind loads. You know, it's the kind of lid on the box when it comes to construction in its forms. And what we do at Truss House, and the kind of definition of Truss House, is the use of the truss as the body of the house sitting on a foundation. So if you think about the kind of last step becomes the only step. And that truss ends up being a full structural portal forming a building envelope. Therefore, you don't have to build a floor and you don't have to build walls before you put the lid on. You just put the lid on the foundation and it functions the same as or better than traditional construction. So it's quite a simple process conceptually.
I was really excited when I actually watched the sort of piecing together of these frames on your site in Waihi Beach. It was quite amazing to see how quickly they come together, and just, the simplicity of the system and the speed of putting it together is quite amazing. So how has it worked moving your business over to New Zealand? How has the New Zealand industry and system embraced this technology?
New Zealand in itself, timing-wise, starting a business right in the middle of COVID was probably a little bit bold. The interesting piece and how we ended up, aside from the timing of being stuck in New Zealand and not being able to meet with our dragons in Canada, is on a trip to New Zealand in 2019. And after meeting with the New Zealand government to talk around Kiwi build and offset manufacturing and kind of housing in general, is we realized that fundamentally, if we are to be the builder, we will always be the problem. We could never be a big enough building company, the same way one factory could never be a big enough factory to serve a whole country. And we kind of had this, or I had this epiphany in November 2019, after Dragon's Den had aired in Canada, that the only way for this to be the scale of solution that not just New Zealand needed, but the world needed, was for us to purely be offering the information on how to do it, not doing it ourselves. So there was, thankfully, a pivot in our own business model prior to being transitioned forcibly by COVID to New Zealand, which was we will no longer build, we will develop the blueprint and license the system to other people. So we had applied for patents, kind of a global patent application for the system at the time, and patent pending, etc. was semi-useful. But the reality is, having built 16 to 18 of these in Canada, I felt like I was the one who knew all the ways to not do it, because if there was a way of it going wrong, it had gone wrong, and we had, fixed it, learned from it, figured it out, etc. So part of the real goal with New Zealand and the New Zealand industry was less around the manufacturing of the product and more around that early design phase. How do the architects get to know about it? How do the engineers design for it? What's the role of the platform leaders, we call them, so MyTech and Pryda, who run all those frame and truss plants? They don't own them, but they run on their software, their equipment, and their plates. So there was actually a really significant transition or pivot in the business model that took that early time in New Zealand to figure out, and it's applicable everywhere in the world. A truss plant uses a particular software, they have a particular process. Where do we fit? How do we fit? And what does that look like? So the industry in itself was quite receptive, but we made a very early decision not to build one-off houses. The goal here is scale. If we get the validation of building someone's batch or one house over here or one house over there, then we would be building our systems to build one-off houses. So New Zealand in itself was actually a really great country to do that early work in, because you can talk to people in New Zealand. You can call the owner of a big truss plant and drive an hour and go, and they'll talk to you, they'll connect with you. They're such relational people. Whereas in the number of years that we built Truss House in Canada, I don't think I ever went to the truss plant once. There was no real excitement to engage. So long answer short, there was no resistance, but also we had a lot of work to do, which took a lot longer, especially given COVID, to get through and nail than we had anticipated. So it was definitely quite a tension-filled time. And everybody we met said, you're wasting your time. New Zealand is a really hard country. Regulations are hard. Product certifications are hard. Something new is not going to work here. We were constantly given that message and constantly found that not to be the case.
Now, I've heard you talking a lot about mentioning words like flexibility, speed, scale, and performance of the system. Can you just go into a little bit more detail of how these four key elements come together?
The hardest problem with talking about Truss House, and I think I've alluded to this, is where many things, we could be all things to all people in depending on what one is really trying to solve for. And we probably recognized in the early days in Canada that the perception of building performance or energy efficiency or lower bills, quite often the reality of if I had to choose to spend more on insulation or get a marble countertop in the kitchen or a second bathroom, quite often then it's a nice to have. There's definitely not a future thinking piece that overrides the immediate short-term goals or ambitions people have when building a house. So it was very clear, and for reasons you mentioned, that the sustainability, energy efficiency, all of that in New Zealand was quite early. It wasn't mandated like it was in Canada. The building code was not requiring an Intello membrane and a blower door test. Here in New Zealand, people were still happy to build with a 2x4, with a 90 mil wall with an R1.2 of insulation. So we really felt that was a difficult kind of selling point from a Truss House perspective. What really resonated with the builders here was speed. So there's an aspect of, I can get these things up quickly. I can build more. I don't need to scale my team. Obviously, trades and trade availability is a big thing here in New Zealand, especially with the kind of draw of Australia. So the attraction quite early on for a lot of the builders was, I can do more with the same people. That's a massive advantage in areas outside of the main cities where getting trades it's tricky enough. So that was kind of probably the first point that really grasped people. So the flexibility is in that process of I can build faster, I can also choose what I'm building. So the beauty of a roof truss or trusses in general is it's just quite a simple mathematical process. So you can go so high, so wide, longer, shorter, curves, asymmetrical triangles. There's really no limitation on the design capacity. There are design typologies that are definitely less efficient, but there was no, here's your box. You can only build this box. And even if you can build this box faster, 50% of your clients are not going to want this box because it's the same as the people down the road. So we were offering quite a tantalizing offer, which is a lot of design flexibility without penalty, speed of getting the building up. So scale for an individual builder wasn't going to be an issue. And then the performance was a byproduct. But the interesting thing is that when you walk into a truss house, it feels different. You've got this wide European style wall. It just smells different. It feels different. The thickness of the walls, like it's very hard to sell a client. And then when they experience it, they go, it just feels different. Oh, wow. Okay. That performance benefit, people could feel it. And then it still is a perk. It's a benefit. By the way, this house also will use 50% less energy. It's never come to the front in New Zealand as the main selling point. Almost too good to be true, speed, scale, flexibility of design. And the big thing in New Zealand and in Australia, which is quite different to the work we're doing now in the US and Canada, is the relational aspect. So Kiwis are all do-it-myself mentality, the number 8 wire, there's my way and I've worked really hard to get to this way, and they're not keen to kind of risk their reputation or standing in the community by trying something new that could end up kind of jeopardizing their business. So for a builder who can go down the road to the guy that he always buys his trusses from, and that same company is going to supply him with the Truss House system, that was a piece we never measured, but has actually been probably the most significant, which is retaining that circle of trust, because it's so hard fought and so hard won here. And in some cases, you only have one supply option. So that relationship is, you speak to these people every day, and we add value to that relationship. It's not a builder saying, hey, look, I'm not going to be buying my building materials from you anymore. I'm going to buy them from a factory over here and they're going to ship me a box or the panels for making a box. Sorry, guys, I'll see you in the pub on Friday. So it's been really welcomed here in New Zealand so far from the builders for a multitude of reasons.
And I see there's quite a lot of options now. You can choose to either have sort of a suspended floor or a concrete slab, and now you can even go into 2-story development.
The early genesis and all the early patents that were granted actually only in the last 12 months from the early application that we did back in 2018 in Canada, which gives you a glimpse into the world of intellectual property and patents. Those patents that have been granted, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, USA, were all for a single level system, the use of a truss as a body of a house on a foundation. And whilst in New Zealand and out of Canada, we realized that, especially from a policy signaling perspective, that the multi-level space was actually going to be densification. They were going to be the future. There is only a certain amount of land, and those who have the opportunity and the privilege to build a single family dwelling on a section were going to be less and less. So we very much tried to, seems simple now, but to kind of create a system where that multi-level space would be served. And we ended up using the work that we'd done for our concrete slab system and developed a 2 and 3 level truss house model. We then went through the process of patenting it and got a patent granted for the first country, which is Ireland, on that randomly for that process. So with the multi-level, I would say the efficiency you get from truss house in a single level form is doubled and quadrupled when you get into the multi-level space, because structurally we are so simple as a structural engineer relative to building multi-level using traditional kind of platform framing, posts, beams, kind of panels. And that is kind of the focus for 2026, is building that. Again, we won't build one off. We've got builders at the moment that have used the system for single level, love it, and are looking into, they're in the process of consenting the kind of multi-level offering to be able to increase density and do so in a way that is both high performance, rapid build, and not complex.
So Kim, sort of to wrap this all up now, if someone's listening to this discussion today, perhaps they're an architect wanting to design with the system, or a builder wanting to build, or even a homeowner thinking this is a great idea, where would they actually start off in this journey of learning about it and actually getting one of these systems built?
Very counterintuitively, not our website. We're kind of a very quiet presence aside from a little bit of LinkedIn social media. So in the midst of resolving our place in the market here in New Zealand and in Australia, we have formed an exclusive partnership with a company called Pryda, Pryda. And Pryda back-end the software manufacturing equipment and structural engineering design for around 40% of the New Zealand truss manufacturers. Pryda have come together with Truss House and are offering Truss House as a product through their network. And the benefit of this is they have 120 staff. They've got a dedicated team of engineers, and they work with truss fabricators and builders and architects on a daily basis, and they have the scale to do so. So Pryda have a dedicated Truss House page on their pryda.co.nz, and they have a dedicated hotline for people to talk to them about getting a truss house system. At the moment in New Zealand, we've had one of the Pryda fabricators, Pahudakawa Frame and Truss, who are based here near us in Waikato, have gone all in on their website, their commitment to building and delivering truss house. They've manufactured pretty much the majority of what we've done in the North Island of New Zealand, and they see Truss House as the way forward in the future to offer a builder traditional, or here's an innovation, and they are above and beyond on their own dime to take this to market. So they've created some really good resources on their website. They also have people dedicated to having conversations with builders, architects, and not as much the homeowner. A homeowner is much easier as a potential homeowner to talk to a builder or an architect that you already know and start the journey via them. That's very much the easiest way to get there. And our goal is to really have Truss House as another product on the shelf, metaphorically, for every New Zealander. So we can build traditional, or we can get Truss House through a local frame and truss. For anybody who's really kind of keen to avail of the recent government regulations around the sub 70 or under 70 square meter houses, we have formed a partnership with Pryda and Bunnings New Zealand through their Clever Living builders. So Bunnings designed 5 architecturally designed high performance 70 square meter and under houses. They're practically a flat pack package, everything from insulation through to doorknobs. It all comes with the builder, including foundation, structural foundation to site, and they're built in 4 weeks. And it's a kind of a fixed price offering, and that's on the Clever Living website right now. So anybody in New Zealand can get the same house without any penalty for location, and then their local Clever Living builder who's already part of their community will come and build that house in a couple of weeks. So it's a phenomenal opportunity, I will say, at a much lower price than the traditional offsite manufacturing space is offering at the moment. So the cost ratio is significantly less to build a high performance truss house. So we don't typically answer the question of how much, because that is very much dependent on the builders, but Bunnings have done an incredible job of bulk sourcing material to put together these packages to offer a local regional homeowner an option to get into the high performance building space at a price that is at or below what a regular house would cost them. So this is coming online slowly. I think there will be 15 show homes by April of this smaller system all throughout New Zealand, from Kerikeri, I think, down to Invercargill, that are either consented or being built over the next few weeks. And that is where most people in New Zealand will get an opportunity to go see, touch, feel what it is to be in a truss house. And then these local builders are obviously at that point super prepared and ready to deliver a bigger home and work with those in their community who want more than a 70 square meter option. So it's quite astounding to us, massively satisfying to know that there is now or will not be a barrier to low cost, high performance for anybody in New Zealand. That's been our goal and our drive, and it's there. We can almost touch it.
Oh, well, Kim, thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating chatting with you today. We'll get all the links from you so we can put them in the description of this audio podcast, and people can actually click through and go and learn more about this fascinating system. Thank you for your time, Kim.
Thank you so much.
Sharing knowledge is at the heart of our strategy to make buildings better for everyone. Sign up for our podcasts to learn more about creating healthy living conditions by protecting building structures from external and internal moisture damage. Thanks for listening. Looking forward to having you with us next time.